Hi, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and on this stream, we work on building Django applications and putting them on the web. I'm working on a journal service that we're going to put out there on the internet, and this is part 9 of that demonstration. I put all of the code that I do for this project live on this stream, so you could catch every aspect of this by watching this set of streams, and I've got a playlist for this if you want to check it out. So come on and join in. We're on our way towards getting this software out there and launched. As a reminder for context before I jump in, this is a journaling service that will be hooked up to email. So it'll send out an email prompt and the user will respond via email, and that's how they will keep track of their journal. The interesting hook is that each prompt that's sent to their email will be a random past entry, so they can kind of remember what their past experiences were like. So we've got a bunch of that done, and we've got a bunch of the email sending done, but we don't have this out live in the world yet, and so we're working towards getting to that. John, good to see you. Thanks for joining in. So we're going to keep working towards this launch list and go through what's here. Now, in the intervening time since we last met, I had a week off because I ran a meetup last week. I didn't actually read the documentation that I said I might. So either we won't do this issue right here, or we will, and we'll just read documentation together. Not the most exciting stuff, but we can probably learn a lot as we're going through this, because there are some things about this that I need to learn that are unique to this project that I haven't done in the past. But I thought we'd start with an area that I do have more experience with, and that is the deployment checklist. So when you put something on the internet, or a SaaS, a software as a service, which is what this stream is about, you got to worry about bad guys. You got to worry about being attacked, and what is the appropriate amount of security to add to your application. I've been very vocal in the past and online. You can go read my stuff. I don't really like the subject of security. To me, security feels like a tax on the internet. Because bad guys are out there, or gals, and it's sad that we have to live in this world where there's not trust. But that's the world that we live in, and security is important. Even though I don't like it, it is important, and I think that I want to be able to offer some assurances to any customers that I have that my software is reasonably secure. Now, I say reasonably secure because there's always going to be that opportunity for some group to be able to hack whatever I produce. And I say that with a high degree of confidence because there are entire agencies of governments that are state actors that's their job to be able to break into this stuff. So I think I view it as a commercial level of security. And that can be pretty robust. It can be pretty hard to break into this stuff if you do a good job. So we're going to go through some checks that Django provides in order to make sure that you're at least doing the basics. There's a ton of stuff you could do in the realm of security, and I'm not going to do it all. I don't think it makes sense to do it all. It wouldn't be cost effective to do it all, nor even possible necessarily for one person to get it all done. But Django gives you some tools that show, like, do this, and you'll do a decent job. It's kind of a minimum bar of things that they know are so common for web applications, they being the Django developers, that it would behoove you to do those things. So let's look at how you get this information, and then how we can fix it and integrate it into our application. And I will probably, just to be really clear, I will draw pretty heavily from decisions I made with my homeschool application. So I don't want to have to dredge up all of these specifics. What's the theory behind some of these security fixes? And so where I can lean on what I do with my other app is going to be beneficial. So we might be sneaking a peek at some other code. That other code has been presented on the stream not hundreds, but about 100 times at least. There's hundreds of hours of content on that, and if you want to check out that project, which is another one that's actively running, you can go to github.com/mblehman/ homeschool is where that code lives. All right, so let's look at the Django docs and see about the deploy checklist. So we're going to go to Django project. And I guess I forgot to add, but I'll do it now. So you're free to ask me anything, even though I'm working on deployment stuff. You can ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development. So I try and stay topical to what we're doing for the evening, but I will definitely pause and try and answer other questions if you've got them. Now, I'm not going to answer about the latest politics or something like that, but if it stays sort of in the realm of development and stuff that software engineers do, then I'm happy to try and address those things. All right, so we've got let's see if we can search for checklist, if that'll do it. Yeah. So here's our deployment checklist. So this comes as a built-in command that's provided by Django, and there's a whole system around areas of the code being able to register checks that they want to enforce. And so you can do this yourself, even if you've come up with things in your system, in your software, that like, I really need these preconditions to be true in order to safely put my software out into the world for whatever deployment kind of thing scenario you have. You can do that yourself, but we're not going to do any custom checks today, but we're going to respect or observe the checks that do exist from this command right here. So if you can see, or I should say you can see, if we're over here, I am needing to, I think my shell might have restarted, so let's get my virtual environment activated. So if we do manage check, this is the command we're going to use, and it looks for potential problems. So check is not just about deployment checking. It can be other types of issues that are discovered as well. Like I said, there's all sorts of things that can be registered as checks. So the category of deploy is kind of a filter down to like what's really important for making sure deployment works. And so we can run manage check, and we might not get any issues here because we haven't supplied the deploy flag. But the deploy flag on this command is going to be a more stringent set. So if we run this again and run manage check with the deploy option, then we're going to get some warnings. Now, I want to make an observation here that's important, and I'm actually going to pull from homeschool when I get this command. Eventually, I will want to put this into our CI process. I always want to make sure that whatever deploy checks are out there that Django is recommending, that we're actually doing the right thing and trying to actually fix those things. But the important thing to note is, look, this little green arrow that I have. It's hard to see. Well, maybe it's not hard to see, but it's hard to know what that means necessarily. And that green arrow is indicative of whether or not the previous command passed or failed from a status code perspective. So a shell has status codes that it can have, and you can actually see the value by doing $0. Nope, that's not right. Is it $? There it is, $? Sorry. And that's whatever number is returned back by a process that executes. And a 0 return means that the process was okay. A non-zero number will mean that some kind of error status is indicated. Often it'll just be 1, but there's a whole set of status codes that different pieces of software might use. But what I wanted to highlight is that Django, when we ran this deploy command, did not return an error status. So these warnings that appeared here were not treated as errors. And this, in my perspective, is important to enforce. So if you're going to, like we're going to do with hooking this into a CI system, we want to make sure that this is actually enforced so that our CI system will fail if there is a warning that's present. But that's not in this configuration. So let's add the command that we want to exist for CI, and then I need to go pull from from the homeschool app to actually get the right command that we're getting the right values. That'll make sense in a second. So I've activated my virtual environment here. I'm in nvim. I want to go to my GitHub workflow. And if actually, maybe I even left it in. Ah, good, I did. So I copied my CI configuration to start from the homeschool app and actually left it in here. So there's certain aspects of this that are needed that I'll highlight, but for now we can just kind of uncomment this. And the thing that that's really important is this fail level thing. So by having fail level set to warning, then the process will actually change its return code. So if we run the same thing and run manage check with deploy and run fail level with the warning value, then you can see that suddenly we have some different output. Like it's essentially elevating a warning into an error. And this is something I do a lot with not only this command, but Python and generally languages that I've encountered. What I found is that warnings, when they're in code, they're usually indicative of things you want to fix. They're rarely things that are like, nope, don't worry about it. But I think they often exist as a category of like, we're going to cause a bunch of people problems, perhaps, if we add this warning. So we're not going to make it an error at that level. So we're going to put it at this warning level to be safe. But if you were smart, you'd fix these things. And I don't know, I'm a rule follower, I guess, and I like to have things be pristine. So I've just adopted a philosophy where I will try to fix warnings in and make sure that whatever tools I have will actually elevate warnings to be treated as errors. And that's what this fail level flag does. In fact, you can see the default value of fail level up here in the help documentation, that it says its perspective is error. So these security things, which we'll dig into in a minute, they're really important if you want to have a safer website. So I would view them as errors. And the fact that they're not elevated at that level is kind of surprising, but again, it kind of comes back to backwards compatibility. So we have now in our changes this set right here. This database URL thing is not applicable yet because we haven't dealt with that. But we are going to have to deal with a real secret key. So I want to say that Django has, let me look through this here. Yeah, so it's got this warning number 9. So these are tagged with identifiers. You can see that these are security category warnings, and each one is given a unique ID. And that's important because sometimes we have to explicitly ignore warnings for decent reasons. I think there might be one of them that we'll ignore this evening that I'll talk about. But they've all been given unique identifiers. It makes it easier to look these things up. It also just convenient. So this particular one, this 009, says that, like, look, you've picked a secret key that's less than 50 characters. And that makes sense because our secret key was that value well, in this case, it is something else. It's Django insecure, which I think has been programmed not to like that one. Yeah, look at this message. So it's less than 50 characters. It has less than 5 unique characters, or it's prefixed with Django insecure, which is like the default value that comes with the template. So what they're trying to say is, like, with Django insecure is that you may have committed this source to your source control repository, and that's bad. So you don't want to rely on a secret key that's been committed to source control. So since they know that this came from the template, it means you probably haven't thought about this and you need to do something. So in our context, what we really need, and we can change our value so that it's not a Django insecure. And we can, I think we could just do that by very directly. I'm trying to remember. Hold on. I don't remember. I'm gonna put up my secret screen for a minute. I don't remember if I put something in the env that is not public. I'm gonna switch to this, keep talking for a moment, and then look at the env file that I have, which can contain secrets. I'm looking through here. No, there's a DSN, which isn't very secret. So bring this back. Hello, Ayush. Yes, I do use Vim. I actually use NeoVim, and it's functionally the same as Vim in most ways, but has some differences. I don't know if you all saw, but Bram, the maintainer of Vim, passed away recently. So that's some sad news. Did a lot of good for the community. Okay, so here we have Django insecure as the prefix here. And I will add, I'll just delete this portion, I think, and that might make that message go away. We might need to make it longer, add some junk on here. So I'm going to run this command, and essentially the process of going through your deploy list is basically you look at this list of warnings, you read the message, and it tells you, hey, something's wrong, and you go fix it. So I'm going to try and run that, and now you can see, okay, I got rid of the Django insecure part, and I'm confident. So this file that I have, this .env file, is a local file that's not committed to source control. So I'm not scared about using the value that's here and so on. So we fixed one thing down, plenty to go. Ayush, when you ask your question, have you configured to use Django ORM in NeoVim? I tell me more. I don't know what that means. So is it? Yeah, I'm just curious what you mean by that. So I don't think I've not done anything specific for the Django ORM. So maybe you have some insight there that I'm not aware of. Okay, so this process is I want to make sure that the rest of the site is configured and ready to go through this each of these checks. So let's go through and look at each one and fix them. And also, now that we know that secret key is something that has to be a different value, I showed you that CI file earlier. So let's bring that back up. And you can see that this value, a secret to everybody, is a junk value. It doesn't need, CI doesn't care, but it's shorter than 50 characters. So down here, there's a secret key, and actually this is the same one that I have in the homeschool CI, but it doesn't matter. It just needs to be a longer value. And I'm trying to get the deploy checklist to pass in CI. So in this case, I'm going to use this longer value. When it finally comes time to deploy to Heroku, I will also pick a secret key value that satisfies the criteria of being the proper length. So I'm not too worried about me like faking something here. I'm honoring the spirit of what that check is trying to do. Okay, so let's look at issue 004. And actually, before I get too far in there, I want to take a moment to remind myself. I think there's an issue that I skip in here. No, not that one. Are there any other silenced checks? No, I guess not. So I'll talk about this now while I'm in here. This is the silenced system checks. So those things that I was showing, the security.w whatever, is called a system check. And if you want to explicitly ignore a system check, you can have this list in your settings file, and you can list out the string of that identifier, security.w004 or whatever. And by doing so, you'll tell the check system of like, hey, I got this. You don't need to handle that. But apparently, I have set my previous project up so that wasn't needed. So that tells me we got to do something about it. Let me read your comment here. Auto completions. Oh, interesting. And suggestions specific to Django ORM. Really? Is there a plugin that you're using that you've used to do that? That's curious. I've not seen. So I have a Python LSP in my NeoVim configuration, but it's mostly just Python stuff. And Django is kind of not very native Python type friendly, I'll just say. And even with the Django stubs project, it still struggles with some of those type annotations. And frankly, it was the Django stubs. I appreciate what they're trying to do, but I found that it wasn't adding value to me. So I actually added it to my homeschool project and then ripped it out because it was causing me frustration. Because I just felt like I was fighting too much with Django, being Django's very dynamic. Because it existed long before the types system existed, I think. So I'm curious what makes your ORM stuff easy to work with. Oh, good call, John. The Flake 8 bug. So you're mentioning Flake 8 Bugbear, I think, right? Not just Bear. And I thought, did I not install that with our requirements? Requirements dev. I guess it's in pre-commit. Pre-commit? Yep, Flake 8 Bugbear. So I am getting some Flake 8 checks there, but does that do Django system checks? That's cool if it does. I just wasn't aware of that. And maybe it's not showing up because I'm only installing this for pre-commit. And if I'm only installing it for pre-commit, then it's not installed in my current virtual environment. And so maybe it's not registering with the system checks that it has. So actually, that's curious. Let's go check that out. I'm interested now. Flake 8 Bugbear. So Flake 8 Bugbear is it's a project I hadn't known much about for a long time, but it adds some extra checks. If you like, so I think I said earlier that I like to take my warnings and elevate them to errors. I think this project is for people like that want to like really lock down their stuff with a bunch of automated checks. But it's usually about code style stuff. Let's go to their homepage and see if they register anything. So they have their own list of warnings, but those might be warnings that are separate. So Flake 8 has its own identifiers, and this is a pretty common pattern. A pattern where a tool puts out some identifiers, and the purpose of putting out well-known named identifiers is that when you're searching on the internet for Flake 8 with whatever the identifier is, you find really good documentation that tells you how to fix it. And so I think that's what Flake 8 Bugbear is doing here. So I think it's categorically unrelated, unless we scroll down and we find that it has like a Django extension, which would be pretty cool. Now, looks like it's unrelated but similar in spirit. But it was worth checking. Thanks for pointing it out. All right, so we've got this one change here. We're not going to ignore this list, which means we need to figure out this secure HSTS seconds. So what I'm going to do is, and we're going to go reference the homeschools site, and I will jog my memory of what this is about. But essentially, HSTS, the idea behind HSTS is if you are on a HTTP domain, notice no S in there, like in the unsecure version of HTTP, then HSTS is a signal to the browser of actually you visited this page with HTTP, but because it's this particular domain, you should redirect to HTTPS. And it is a setting that browsers are pretty serious about it. So there's some good warnings here of make sure you set this right, because if you don't set it right, then it becomes really hard to like fix because it's on the somebody else's browser side. But I think we're going to set it correctly, so we can go ahead and add it. So we've got secure. Oh, but there's a bunch of them. Secure. Well, phooey. So we've got secure HSTS seconds, but we also have secure HSTS preload, which I don't remember that. And then there's also secure HSTS includes subdomains. Okay, there's a shoot. Let's go read the docs. So I don't know if it's in security features or where we need to go necessarily. Well, let's go to the secrets page, or sorry, the settings page, and then just start searching for this. Okay. Let's read carefully, because as they've got these big scary warnings on, I don't want to necessarily blow up my site if I do this wrong. Secure HSTS includes subdomains is defaulting to false, so I set it to true on homeschool. If true, security middleware, which is a piece of middleware that we're running, adds this includes subdirectives domain to the header that makes all of this work. Oh, interesting. It has no effect unless, as the operative word, this has a value. Okay, so this works in tandem with the HSTS seconds thing, which is the thing we're going to set in a second. All right, so let's set it to true. Let's take this and come over to our own settings file in the journal app. And is there already a security section in here? No. Okay. So let's go down a little bit, and before we get to third party, here's static alphabetically. Let's cluster those things together for internationalization. We'll add security, and then we will paste this value. So this is only going to apply when we have the seconds thing attached, that I feel okay about. Now we're ready to go back and look at these other two. And it looks like I made these settings, so we're going to do something similar most likely. In fact, I have them up here as well for what they should be, but I want to go read what they're about, because that's important to know. So we've got secure HSTS preload. Default is false, and I set that to true. And remember, or maybe you don't remember if you've never joined before, my perspective is that I want my defaults to match what I expect for production, with the goal being I want to configure as little as possible for production, and want the site to be as secure as it can be by default. So we're going to make our default true, but then we'll probably set it to false locally for reasons we'll get to. So it adds this preload directive to this header. It has no effect unless HSTS seconds is set to a non-zero value. So maybe we can just set it to true. I don't know if it needs to be a setting. If what I'm going to do, okay, we'll keep going. So I think what I'm going to do is come over here and say secure HSTS preload. I'm going to set it to true. That was the name of the value, right? Preload. Yep. Okay. Because I don't need that to be configurable, because it's only going to apply when I have a non-zero value for HSTS seconds. All right. Now, we're only getting to the actual setting here. So the setting that we need to talk about is this seconds value. And you can see it defaults to 0. So if we set this to a non-zero value, it's going to set this strict transport security. So that's what HSTS stands for. Look, HSTS, HTTP strict transport security. So that's a header that gets added to all your HTTP requests, what hints to the browser, make this secure no matter what, and redirect to HTTPS if it's an HTTP request. So this is really what we want, and looks like I probably did some research on this to figure out what is an appropriate value for this header, because browsers will then cache this in association with a domain, and I've got this set to 60 times 60 times 224 times 365, so basically 1 year in seconds. So let's highlight this, let's copy it, and let's go put this in our env here. So I'm going to put that right here before Sentry enabled. Okay. Then we want to have, that's going to be the default, but I'm going to come down to the security section and say secure HSTS seconds equal to env secure HSTS seconds. What I don't want to have happen is I don't want to deal with this during local development, because I don't want the browser trying to do something crazy like redirecting localhost to HTTPS when I don't want to, because I don't want to set up certificates, and some people can and do choose to set up local certs for doing local development. I find that the juice isn't worth the squeeze, to follow the phrase. So as long as I have confidence that I'm going to have a secure certificate in my production setup, my local setup can be using not HTTPS. So essentially what I want here is enough controls to be able to turn it off in local development mode. So we've got secure HSTS seconds here, and then we've also got it down here. So that's good, but I want to make sure that it stays at 0, right? And not uses that value. Like I said, I want to turn that off. So we're going to go into the env example, and we're going to add this as QRSTU secure HSTS seconds. We're going to set it to that default value of 0. All right, so that's to the example. We also want to make sure that it's added to the actual env file. All right, so now we have a scenario where that stuff is set. The problem is this security 04 thing is probably going to complain about it still, because we set it to 0 locally. Yeah, you can see it's still complaining because we've set to 0. So I think what we're going to do, if I go back and I change this and just even set it to 1 second, that should make that 04 go away. And it did, which is good. But I don't want to keep that for our local setup here, and I don't want to forget about it. But what's important over here, so this is back in the homeschool app. Let's go look at the GitHub workflow, and probably somewhere in here, really, secure, what's going on? Did I set it with an secure? Oh, I left it off? Aha, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm not going to set any value, and then when CI runs, then it will use the default. Again, this comes back to the benefit of having defaults that are secure. So it's going to use the default, which will be a number, a fairly large number, a year's worth of seconds, and it's going to say, okay, you're good to go. So I think that particular check is good. All right, so then we have secure SSL redirect is next. Let me read this message to remind myself. You're welcome to read it too, of course. Okay. All right. So I think what happens here. So security is this multi-layered thing. And we just set HSTS. HSTS is that header that tells somebody's client to say, if you got a request that's at HTTP, send it to HTTPS. And that's good. That's a protection. But there's another layer of protection that we can add, that we can also check it on the server side and do the same thing, same kind of behavior. So it's like belt and suspenders. And so that's what I think SSL's secure SSL redirect is about. So when the request comes in from Django, if it sees that it got it over HTTP, it can try and do the similar kind of redirect. Again, this is not something that I want in development, so this is probably a setting that we can add to our settings and make sure that that's working right. Matt M., welcome. Let me read your comment here. Am I building this as a multi-tenant system? Yes, in the sense that it will be available to multiple users. I did talk in the past about using Django tenant, and there's one of these in this series. I think I spent a fair amount of time actually, but I can't remember which one. Apologies. Discussing the trade-offs between different modes of multi-tenancy. So my selection here, my mode of multi-tenancy is everybody is a user in the system, and that I will make sure that any data that belongs to them has a foreign key to them, and then I will be writing tests to assert that whenever I'm accessing somebody's data, I'm always doing it connected to them. So I have high confidence that they're not getting anybody else's data. So that's my approach to making this a multi-tenant system. All right, let's return to this secure SSL redirect. This is one that, why did I set that to on in this? There's probably some problem that I had to set it to off on this project. No matter. Okay, we're gonna come over here. Oh, you're welcome, Matt. Hopefully that answered the question. So we want to add this new setting. Will I be at DjangoCon? I am not able to go to DjangoCon this year, or I'm choosing not to. It's not a good fit for me this year. I would love to, maybe next year, but sadly won't be there. It's actually not even too far from where I live. I think it's in North Carolina or something. I'm not gonna be making it, unfortunately. So we want to add this secure SSL redirect. We'll drop that right here. And we want that to be true by default again. So that will do the right thing. But then we want to make sure that we're actually using this value. We'll come down to the security section. This is kind of the annoying part about setting up the environment stuff, is you got to like not only have it in the environment and its defaults, but then you have to wire it to Django settings. I wish there were better ways to do that. There are, but this is Django's default way to do it, and it's not worth deviating too far from that. So let's take, actually, delete that line. Let's change this to secure SSL redirect, right? Did I get that name right? Yep. So that is there. And again, we want to come back, and I want to make sure that I'm not doing this in local development. We want to go back to our example file and say secure SSL redirect and turn that off. Off and on are kind of the ways that Django env wants to refer to environment variables for Boolean states. There's a couple other ways, but it's an easy one to remember. And then also put this in the actual env file. Oh, I guess I had that down below. All right, let's keep up the example. Well, that's almost certainly going to confuse me, but whatever. Okay, so now we can run this, and it's not going to fix the problem, or it's not going to report that the problem is fixed. And that's because we didn't actually fix it. We set it to an off value. So we should be able to synthesize that, though, by telling this process with an environment variable here that we want to like override this for this one command. So we might actually, so we get to continue to whittle down to this list, we're going to modify our commands to actually change the environment value just for that single time. And you can see it made that 08 go away. We can also do the same thing for, and it's going to make our command line long, but that's okay. Secure HSTS seconds equal 1. And that should make the, did I spell it wrong? I did second, not seconds. That makes the warning 4 go away. All right, so now we're chipping away at it. All right. Session cookie secure is not set to true. So this is a cookies. How far down do I want to explain about these different pieces? Cookies. There's an HTTP header called a cookie, and cookie is a way to like send data back and forth between a client, a browser, and a server. Cookies sometimes have a bad reputation because they can be used in all sorts of nefarious ways, but cookies can also be used for very good purposes of like storing your session ID. And without cookies, a web browser it's not very easy for a web browser to maintain its state with its server. So you'd have to like re-authenticate over and over again. So cookies are pretty important, but you want to do some changes, or you can do some changes to help make cookies more secure for the browser so that other domains can't access the cookies, and it marks them in certain ways. The ways is the part I'm not going to get into. You can go read up all about it. So that the cookies that are attached to all of your headers outbound from Django are hinted at to the browser of you should do these extra layers of control on it because that's what this person wants. And the reason these things are turned off by default is that it makes the if your site's not ready to handle it, it makes the web harder to use. So the web optimizes for maximum compatibility at the cost of security and safety sometimes. And this is I think an example of that. So we do want to have session cookie secure. And again, this is another one that we're going to have pull from as a variable. We want this to be true by default in production. So we're going to add this as a setting. So down here of session cookie secure. And then the deploy check is going to pass, but we want this to be off when we're doing development because we don't want to deal with secure stuff because it's going to add layers that's going to be annoying to work with. So we'll say session cookie secure is equal to off, and we'll also put that in the actual env file here. So we've set that, but then we got to go use it. Session cookie secure. Set that there. So I think we wired everything up, but it's still going to fail here because we are defaulting to off. So in order to fix that, we can then add session cookie secure equal on, and then that'll prove that we've actually fixed it when the environment variable is present. Cool. We've got another similar one here with the CSRF token. The CSRF token is a whole other security layer that has to do with, well, it stands for cross-site request forgery. It's essentially a protection mechanism that you add to HTML forms so that you can prove that the receiver of the form who sends it back to you is who they said they were, roughly. I wrote an entire article on all of these things, actually, so if you want to go to my website at mattlehman.com and check out my Understand Django book that's online there, you can go read about most of these. I think I might have even written about all of them. So these are the handful of settings that are available in Django, and I documented of like, why does this exist? What does this actually do? So where I'm not going into those details tonight, you can learn more on your own if you're truly interested. Okay, so we've got CSRF cookie secure, another thing that we want to default to true. And we can come up here and plop it in our settings list. And go back to security. Put it there. CSRF cookie secure. Getting that right? Yep. Sometimes you type these things out and you're like, did I spell that right? Did I name it right? Okay, CSRF cookie secure. We want that to be off here. And I'm gonna put that there. So this command, when we run it again, should not fix warning 16. Right? That's expected. But now if we add CSRF cookie secure to be on, it did. Cool. All right, the last one I think is already done for us, although I haven't. So I've got the site configured to have debug on by default because we're in development mode. It's kind of the one thing that we have flipped, or it's one of the things that we have flipped. But you can see at the top, I already have debug mode set to false. This is frankly, of all the settings that I've discussed this evening, this is the most important of them. The debug mode is really bad news if you have it set to true and it's public on the internet. You basically have given away all the keys to your kingdom. And the reason for that is the debug mode will try to render a very specific and helpful page if there is a problem in your application. And that's useful for development, right? And that even includes routes that don't match. So let's say you have debug mode on and you deploy your website. Somebody visits your website and they just type in some junk in the domain, a route that definitely will not match something that you have in your urls.py file. If debug mode is on, it's going to bring up a page that says, hey, this route doesn't exist. Here's all this details. And the problem is that details part. That details part will list out the settings of your application. And the settings is often where we stuff all of our secrets, all of the keys that you might have to Stripe or anything that's expensive that you might want. Is likely going to end up in those locations. Bad news, right? So you definitely don't want debug on. So even though I'm not adding any new code for it here, I'm trying to take a moment to speak to it so that it's not lost on people. We're defaulting it to false. So a lot of these is kind of the inverse situation. A lot of these settings are defaulting true to make them more secure. And then this is the inverse view of that, where we want to make sure that it's, well, I guess it's still more secure, but it's a negation logic rather than a positive logic. So we should be able to change this and go to the beginning and say debug equal off. And then finally, Okay, here's the output we want. So we've got this fail level warning. We've passed all the checks for deploy, and we've got the little green arrow, which indicates, again, as a reminder, that's our status code. You can do $? And you can see what the status code of the last command was. So like if I type something that doesn't exist, you can see ZSH was angry about that, and I've got red, and I have to do $? Gave a 127 status code to show that it was not what it was supposed to be. Okay, so that is the deploy checklist. Pretty cool. We have added a handful of settings. What was that? In the end, it was only how many? 6. So 2 of them I set to true by no matter what. But remember what the docs said for that. And I'm looking at include subdomains and a preload on HSTS. And the documentation said these aren't going to do anything if the value is 0. So I figured it was safe to set them to true because they're going to be meaningless in our development context where we're setting the value to 0. So that's pretty good. Let's run the test suite, make sure that everything is still passing and that the suite can actually run. Okay. I think we're good here. I might have some stuff from that I merged from before, so I'm going to stash this for a second and then try and pull. Oh, good. So there's nothing from the repository, which there shouldn't be if I'm staying true to this stream. So let's put that back. We'll add it to the Git stage, and then we'll commit. And this is the apply fixes for deploy checklist. And this is going to fixes number number 19. All right, and I pushed that up. And the reason I want to push that up so quickly is that I want CI to be running because I want to validate that we got the CI change right. So I modified a GitHub CI step. And sometimes those things are finicky. So even though I think it's correct, I want to make sure we'll check it before we move on to the next chunk of work. All right. So now we've got some pieces here. We've got deploy to Heroku. We have send grid configuration. We have out process inbound email. I'm trying to think about which one of these makes sense to do. And if and are all of these truly necessary for launching this? I don't think so. There's probably the pieces of this we could launch beforehand. All right. There's another one that popped up in my head. Let's pour over our settings for a little bit. And delete this comment that's not meaningful to me. So just going through here, I'm just scanning through this to see if I've missed anything. And I know that there's at least one area that we have missed that I've not covered yet. All of our middleware is okay. Root configuration. Templates are all good. There's that hack that we had to do for the debugging for template stuff. All right, this is the area that we have to fix. databases. We'll return to that in a minute, though. Well, I will come over here and come to milestone and type it out and explain it in a minute. Okay. I'm looking at the auth stuff. This auth stuff all makes sense to me. We already configured a lot of that. We did some email stuff. There's probably more to do there. Internationalization stuff I'm not going to mess with. It's all going to be English, but we want to have the basics in here of setting this to UTC. We just set some security things. We did static files. Static files, DIRs. I'm trying to remember what that's about. What is that? Static files, DIRs. Whoops, sorry for bumping the mic. This setting defines the additional locations the static files app will traverse if you use collect static. Oh. Well, so what's versus static root? Isn't that is like extra locations? Static root. Because that's the output location. Yes. Okay. So I don't have any right now, but if at some point I want to add my extra static content, like images, like if I come up with a logo for this service and I want to be able to have that be collected in static, this is saying this is a location that you can look. Sorry, I don't know why I had such a brain fart on that. So this doesn't exist today, which is why it's commented out, but we will almost certainly use it in the future. So we've got site ID, all this Django, all that stuff that's already definitely configured. Okay. All right. So it's really just this databases section. So chat about it. Right now, for local development, the database is configured to use SQLite 3, which is really convenient because it's just a file. I can do an ls or a list on this directory, and you can see there's this db.sqlite3 file. And all of our data content so far is fitting into 268K. Tiny. We, however, cannot use SQLite 3 with the platform that I'm going to use. So as a reminder, or if you're new, I'm going to deploy this to Heroku. Heroku is a platform as a service. I've had a really good experience with them. They last year changed their policy, so they have no free tier. So if you want to use them, it's going to cost you. And but I found that the trade-off of what I get for using them is worth the cost. And there are other services out there that you might be able to find offer a similar user experience, but I've been really impressed with Heroku's ease of use. With the Heroku model, you essentially push to a Git repository, and it does all of like the building. It detects that it's a Django project, so it knows how to configure that properly. for most of the stuff. It knows how to find Python projects and install things. It is it's pretty slick. And it's low friction, which as a person running a side project, that's important to me. So the cost to run a site, as we're going to configure it, will be about $16 a month. Hoping that I get enough customers that will negate that cost. Of course, I'd like to more than break even if possible. But even if I get just a handful and I get to a point where I'm paying Heroku $5 a month, then that's a break-even point where with the journal service that I'm trying to replace. But I have higher aspirations than that. But we're going to use Heroku to do that. And so, getting back to the database connection, the way Heroku works is you can't just use SQLite 3. And the problem is that the file storage from where your application runs with Heroku is not stable. So Heroku builds this like image thing, which they actually call a slug for weird reasons to me. And they will take your application packaged up into this slug thing, and they will put it in their infrastructure and run it on one of their machines somewhere. Now, what you have no control over is which machine they run it on. And on top of that, they will move it while it's running. So you might be running on one machine for a little while. Your site might be running on one machine for a little while, and then 30 minutes later, move to another machine. And when it moves, the only thing that's moving is the application. Anything that you stored on the file system stays on that previous machine and is presumably like deleted and wiped away. So in this configuration that I've been working with locally, I have this local file that's my database. And you can hopefully see how that's going to be a problem. The problem is when we deploy to Heroku, we can go ahead and start it up there and run the migrations and have a database be set up as a SQLite file. But as soon as Heroku, on whatever schedule it wants, decides to take our app and move it from here to here, then that database is left behind. So that means that you need to connect to a different database, a database that is outside of those constraints of moving around in the system. So what Heroku offers that we'll use as the data storage is a Postgres database. And so your app might be moving around, but the Postgres database stays fixed with a consistent name that you can reference, and they provide all of that information. And on top of that, they provide it in a certain format that they're calling a database URL. And that database URL is kind of well specified, and there are packages that enable a piece of Python code to read a database URL and turn that into parameters that then can be fed into Django's database settings. A long way to say that, but essentially all of the stuff in this engine area of the database gets replaced by a database URL. You don't even need to specify engine. You can just specify, well, that might be wrong. You might still need to say Postgres. So there's that aspect. There's also, we also have to work through some configuration to make Postgres work. So that's the plan to get that going. Let me write it down. So switch to use database URL, add the Postgres driver. Postgres, if you've not, Postgres is actually short for PostgreSQL, written this way. It's a weird name, but a really solid database. Very powerful, very well respected database, very solid, and it happens to be the one that Heroku supports. So all of those things add up to like, that's what I'm going to use as my database. I'm sure you could use others or try to connect to other database services that are outside of Heroku's realm if you wanted, but I don't have any reason to. So we need to set that stuff up. There's some complications with getting Postgres going that we'll have to work through as well. Yeah, you'll see that in a moment. So let's start by setting up the database URL package stuff. And the end state of this is basically a refactor, where by the end, we want to have the same SQLite path that we can use. And that's about it. So the project is called DJ database URL. Let's go to PyPI and look for this. Here it is. So it takes a database URL, that's the name that we want, and it transforms it into the configuration that you need. And you can see how it does that, and it basically, well, because it's DJ, the DJ part is hinting at Django. And then we can add some extra settings as we want, just by calling this config function. So step 1, wrong project. Sorry. Step 1, go to the requirements file and add DJ database URL. Whoops, hyphens. And we want the latest version, which is 2.1.0. Okay, then we can go to our pip compile command and compile the requirements. You can see we've added well, I've got some deleted lines from when I was reviewing the settings file, but we've got DJ database URL, and apparently it requires typing extensions as an extra package. So then we can do a pip install, and we've got our pip install. So now we should have DJ database URL available to us, and should be able to return to the settings file. Oops. Oh, come on. Settings. And I'm going to restart the LSP because it's not going to know about that package until I do that. So we want to change and import DJ database URL. And then go to the database section. Now let's go read the documentation, because you set it with this, it doesn't set the whole dictionary, it only sets the default. Also, there's a handful of checks here as well that I think are security related. So I'm going to refer back to my other project to see how I did it there. Oh, boo. Okay. Database SSL require. Why did I set that? So there's some more settings that come along with this stuff. SQLite has the benefit of being super easy, so it's just a file. But as soon as you're dealing with another database, databases tend to have settings you have to think about. There's a couple that come into play here. Surprised about that SSL require thing. Kind of annoying. Lopez, my homeschool project, yes, you're correct. It is big. But that's because I was, so I think you're correct in that big, but it wasn't big when I started. And that seems like a self-evident statement. But if you went all the way back, and that was to streaming episode around 60, I tried to start from the beginning. And I'm doing the same thing here. So y'all are getting to see this journey of like building a SaaS from nothing when it is small. So you might actually have more luck with the journal application, even though it's incomplete. Because what happens is what we're doing is just we're adding the layers and building it up over time. And hopefully that gives it, I would hope that that would be an encouragement that all of these projects that people build, they started out from the same spot, which is nothing, and had to go from there. So if you are looking at that, just recognize that the homeschool it's just got 2 years of history in it, or 2 years plus. And hopefully that provides a valid perspective. Looking through this documentation, what I'm not seeing is, why did I have SSL require over here? Is that an extra option? SSL require might have been something that I added. Why would I have added that? Database SSL require. Let's go read that. Maybe they got rid of it. I mean, they just assume. Oh, I understand. Your English not being very good. That's okay. If you need any help with anything, let me know. Ask a question, and I'll try and rephrase. Yep, I hear you. Let's check out this project's homepage and see. Oh, no problem. See if they comment on this. It looks like the same documentation that's showing up on there. So I'm going to search for SSL require. Okay, I see. So SSL require is setting the SSL mode option. That, I don't remember if that's a Django thing or if it's an option that gets passed on to Postgres. I'm drawing a blank, honestly. Let's do a quick search for it. SSL require. Oh, that was not it, right? SSL mode, sorry. SSL mode. I think that's a Postgres thing. Yeah. I suspect, well, you know, we can validate this. We can go look at the history. So here we are, Lopez. I'm using homeschool as a reference too. So the other advantage of doing stuff like this for years is that you've eventually built up a portfolio where you can be like, what did I do again? And use that to remind yourself of techniques that you've applied. So we are at, I want to get an understanding of database SSL require, which I added back in 2021. Aha, okay. There was a project. The project's still out there. It's not going away. It's called Django Heroku. And it was a convenience package that tried to configure the things that you need to work with Heroku. But eventually, what I found is the way it worked is you would call this Django Heroku. Actually, it's probably in this exact diff somewhere. Yeah, you'd call this settings thing, you'd pass it the local settings from this module, and then you could have these different things that it would configure. But if you notice in this diff right here, I have turned off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what happened was, over time, partly because of the neglect of the project, the things that it was trying to configure were wrong. So I was turning it off, but keeping the part that was valuable, turning it off, but keeping the other part that was valuable. And eventually it got to a breaking point where it's like, none of this is valuable anymore. So I replaced it and went with the raw configuration myself. And I think I had to look at the code to figure out what I was doing. I was trying to make sure I was replicating what was there. I'm pretty positive that the way to read this is that I must have looked at the configuration settings for that repo and determined that they were using SSL require, and they were probably using a connection max age as well. And I wanted to carry that over. And the reason these probably exist is probably because of Heroku's own Postgres configuration, where they're expecting SSL. And so I want to mirror that here. So we want to do the same thing that they were doing, and do it also in the journal project. So that's going to complicate. We got to bring over a couple more settings, but that's what we need to do. So over here, I'm going to, for the moment, comment this stuff out. And let's actually take the database section from over here and just directly copy it. Why not? So we've got our new database section here, but these are going to fail because we don't have this set in the defaults. So we want to come back up to this other project, take these two values, and put them right here. But importantly, we don't want to do this for development mode. So this is another one where we need to go set some things, and I'm almost positive. Yeah, you can see that's turned off in CI. So we want it to default, but we want it to be off in CI. As you know, as I stated that, I didn't actually check to see if our actions passed. Let's see if that passed. It did not. Whoops. I said I was going to check it, and then I didn't. Sorry, y'all. Oh, it's because of the redirect. The secure thing is probably on. Yep. So this is here's an example of what would happen if the SSL secure redirect is turned on. So you can see it's doing a permanent redirect. That's a status code 301. And it's trying to send us to https://test server. Test server is the name that's just given to the local client when it's running. That's the domain it's trying to run on. So we need to fix that by copying this setting right here into our CI file. Okay. That should hopefully fix that. Also, since we're over here, we need to also turn this off in CI as well. That's the database thing. We don't want to try and make it do a secure connection when it's running in CI. And then coming to in the example file, we will set database SSL require be off, and then put it in our env file as well. looking at your question here about the YAML stuff. Yeah, the YAML here is, this is an environment configuration for every step in this process. Although at an individual step, you can add or override with its own environment. So as I pointed out earlier, you might not have joined the stream yet, I've got this secret key setting, which is going to be required in order to run. Most of the time, I don't care about the value when I'm running the tests. But when I'm doing a deploy configuration check, it matters what the value is, so I'm changing it here. So that's why those are getting added there. Okay, so now we have our database set up there. The thing that we still need to do is actually set a database URL. So again, drawing from our project over here, this is how we can configure it to match the current configuration. So a database URL looks like the name of the database that you want to run. So in this case, it's locally, we're going to use SQLite. And then the syntax can vary a little bit on the database. And so SQLite's syntax here is saying we're going to use a file path at wherever this is running from, named db.sqlite3. There's no authentication required here, so there's no username password stuff. But if this was Postgres, actually you can see an example of what Postgres kind of looks like. Postgres says this first one is the engine you want to use, Postgres engine, and then this Postgres and this other one separated by a colon and before the @ sign is a username and password. And then this is the actual location. This is the port for the Postgres, and then this is the database name. There's a lot more information in there, and you know, these username and password would be much different values in a real setting. But for the setup that I had here, where I was trying to connect it to a container, a Docker Compose container, it defaulted to a username and password of Postgres, which is very insecure, but convenient. So let's take this same path and drop that in as a database URL. Yeah, getting this stuff to connect to Postgres can be finicky. I can definitely understand you, Lopez. But with any luck, we will get it. All right, so now I've got Django DJ database URL. I've got these settings. They're turned off. And we've got a configuration for SQLite 3. So one more change that I want to make that I'm remembering now, and that is a test-related setting. So we have a settings file, but we also have a test settings file. And when we're running our tests, the fact that we're now using database URL means that the tests are probably operating. Well, maybe I already changed this. Maybe I already fixed that. Hold on. I could be. Never mind. So in our test settings, we're going to use an in-memory database and not touch the local database. That's good. So that's already configured. No worries there. So it's time to validate that this is actually working properly by running make and seeing if it starts up. Make is just a shortcut that I have that runs Heroku local, and Heroku local will run my local process that's in my proc file along with any settings that are discovered in an env file. Let's go to localhost, and it's not there yet because we haven't even made a page. So we should be able to go to admin Oh boo. What's the name again? It's Matt, password of create horse. Create horse. Okay. Yeah, that string does look wrong to me, Lopez. So I'll bring up my example again, and that you can stare at for a second and see, and we can point out where it differs from where you commented. So over here, I had that sample file. So right off the bat, yours is saying PostgreSQL, and I think it's often just Postgres with no QL. There's one observation. Then the difference here is this, that highlighting is not coming up very strongly, but this first Postgres after the // but before the colon, that's the username. Then you have the colon, and then you have the password. So you have, well, you did say the @ sign though, because I don't know. Maybe there is supposed to be a syntax that works when you have an @ sign. I'm not familiar with that though. So I'm not actually sure what you're supposed to do if there's an @ sign in your password. I'd kind of ask, could you change your password to not include an @ sign? That might be a simpler solution. And yeah, otherwise it looks pretty close to what I would say is accurate. So if Postgres supports a query string parameter like you have it there, that's news to me, but I can't speak beyond that. The Code Alchemist, are you asking for a link to my code here? Okay, so the fact that we are looking at this, there's an account object in here. We've got all the data. Just tells me that we're now using the database URL and it's looking at that same DB SQLite 3 file that we had before. So we've successfully configured the database URL portion of this. We've got that. I want to, let's do a little bit here, extra here. Want to change, to delete that. I want to bring back that in-memory database because I think there were problems that I encountered when I tried to run in CI without that. So we'll bring that line back. And with any luck, that's it. So let's review the change and then push it up. Because I really want to get back to a state where that CI is working, and it's not. So I want to make sure I don't get too far down the path and continue to do stuff with broken CI. So we've added a couple of new settings that are for SSL require. And did I not add, secure SSL redirect, that was the thing that was broken. We've got DJ database URL. We've got the new environments values with their defaults that are secure, which is good. We've replaced the database dictionary with the call to DJ database URL config. And then we've got the new package itself added to our requirements file. So far, so good. So let's add that to the stage. Let's commit all this stuff. Actually, before I do that, let's run the suite, just a sanity check. Yep. Commit this. Switch to database URL. And this doesn't fix the issue we're working on, but it gets us a step closer. So we'll say 4 instead of fixes. So I think the code alchemist, I'm looking at your line there. You have database URL equals database colon host at user port. I don't think that that's accurate. I think that it is the database engine is the first thing. That's the protocol basically. That's so the thing before colon slash slash. And then you have username and optionally password. Both of them are actually optional. And then the @ sign. And then you have the host name. And then you have the port number. And then you have slash and then the database. So what I don't know is I don't know if you can do the keyword argument that Lopez was showing with the question mark with password and the value there, or the query string argument, I should say. Jeffrey, do I try and stay with SQLite for as long as possible? Yes. I find that SQLite is a very convenient database to work with. It's super fast. I know there are different philosophies here that some people absolutely say, like, no way. Why would you? Because there's some SQLite's awesome, but it also is looser in terms of how strict it is about typing. So there it will. Let's say you had a text or a character field that you wanted to constrain on the number of characters, and then you wrote in your Django code that like you put in more characters into a field than you're supposed to. In actual SQL or SQLite is actual SQL. In other database engines, character fields might actually enforce those constraints and say, no, you said this was only supposed to be 32 characters, and you put in 128 or whatever, some other value bigger than 32, and I'm going to blow up because I didn't actually allocate storage space for that field in that way. SQLite will just be like, all right, man, you gave me more data than that. I'm going to, even though you told me it's going to be this big, I'm just going to store it anyway. So that looseness is pretty powerful and it's flexible, but it comes at that cost of not being as exact. And so some people will assert that it is better to have a database that is closer to your engine that you're using on the real website. And I can see an argument for that. The benefits would be that like you have increased confidence that what you're doing locally is nearer to what your actual site will be running. The trade-off that I found is the setup cost of having a local database server. Either it gets you into one of two situations. Like with Postgres, I could run Postgres with Brew and have a Postgres server running natively on my operating system on the Mac. One might argue that is actually it's going to be different because I'm on a Mac OS here, and I've got Postgres running, and it's like Linux version of Postgres. It's definitely nearer than SQLite, but there's still differences. The other way to do it would be to use something like Docker and run Postgres inside of a Docker container, and that would let you get closer to whatever your target operating system is. But then you have the overhead of now dealing with a Docker container and the complexity of running and virtualizing, that kind of stuff. It's not, virtualizing is not strictly the right word, but having that extra overhead layer. But what I found with SQLite is that SQLite is so prevalent. I mean, all of your operating systems probably come with it by default because it's used everywhere. Mac actually uses it extensively on some of their internal files. It's a great, because it's structured data. They actually have some of their I don't remember exactly which files, but like the photos, their photo tools and stuff like that, they keep all their metadata in SQLite, and they're just kind of buried in file names that they don't say they're SQLite, but that's what they are under the covers. And if you knew where they were, you could go and browse them. In fact, Simon Willison, popular, he's one of the original people behind Django, very interesting guy, has a bunch of talks on how he's really into SQLite and he loves it as a tool. And then he searched through his operating system, he runs Mac as well, and looked for SQLite files and just try to discover like how much could he programmatically access his own data from his operating system. Fascinating stuff. So that's a pretty big tangent, but SQLite's powerful, and it's so ubiquitous that it means that the reason why people can get up and running with Django so quickly is just like it's there, and you didn't even have to think about it when you ran the tutorial because it just works, and it comes with Python by default. So that's why I bias towards sticking with SQLite for as long as possible. When does it come back to bite you? It comes back to bite you when there are things that you want to use from a particular database that aren't available in SQLite. So Postgres has some JSON features, although I think SQLite's getting better about JSON stuff. There's geospatial features that Postgres can. There's a bunch of like extensions that that it can have. That if you're trying to use SQLite locally and Postgres somewhere else, that's where the behavior can diverge too much, and so it becomes hard to test that custom stuff because you're not running the same engine. So you shouldn't expect that it would return the same behavior. I still have not encountered many scenarios where that's really necessary because I just try and stick to pretty standard stock vanilla SQL for a lot of stuff. But those are my thoughts and opinions there. All right, let's carry on. Looks like y'all are solving Lopez's password dilemmas. Cool. So where does that leave us? We are now in this state. That's probably enough passage of time to check on CI first. So before I forget, check on actions. Oh, come on. What's broken now? Secure SSL redirect setting is not true. All right, fine. So I turned it off up here so that the test would pass, and that's why I had it for this. Why this project had it in the override. So we got to replicate that too. Okay. Make, deploy, config, check, pass. Hopefully. Push that up. All right, while we're waiting for CI there, I feel like this is going to pass this time. Let's talk about Postgres. So let's actually go read the documentation for Postgres first. So Django, actually, let's rewind even further. Django's pretty powerful in that a lot of its pieces are swappable. It does this, and sometimes it calls it engines. In other pieces, it calls it backends. It all depends on the context. I wish they would normalize on the names there, but they didn't. So with the Django ORM, the object relational mapper, which is how you interact with a database, you get the same interface, but you can hook into SQLite or Postgres or MySQL or Heaven Forbid Oracle, and make use of these and plug them into your Django project. Most of the aside from the default engine of SQLite, they require some extra configuration. Postgres is no exception. If we search for Postgres, you'll find that the extension is built in, but there's more work that we have to do. So we have to add this config stuff to get it going. And I need to remember what pieces we have to do. Because some of this comes from just the database URL. Just the fact that a database URL will say Postgres : / in the future will indicate to Django that it should use the Postgres engine. But if you don't have the right packages installed, then it's going to blow up on you and say, like, I don't know how to handle Postgres. So that's the part that we have to fix. And I don't remember if that configuration is here or if it's somewhere else. Because there's cool things that you can take advantage of, like full text search and so on. I did not see any news about Postgres. Oh. Cool. That's pretty neat. Thanks, Lopez. And am I getting that right? I see there's an I before your name. Is it I Lopez? Apologies if I'm butchering the pronunciation there. So where do we need to go? It looks like, so this is the Django contrib Postgres package, which has the extra features that you can use out of Postgres, but there should be stuff about the actual setup. Let's go search for the data. Let's go back to the settings stuff and look for database and see if we can follow that path. There might be stuff about for the different engines here. So here we are at the databases documentation. Starts talking about the different engine bits. See the engine setting below on how to specify other database types. So note, check it out. When we want to use Postgres, these are all of those, so all of that database URL stuff fills in all of these fields, which were fields that were on that string that we just walked through and discussed in detail. And it parses them all out and puts them in the right places for you, which is pretty cool. So we've got Django DB backends Postgres, but I know there's an extra package we need. I'm just trying to find the documentation for it, which is a little frustrating that it's not so obvious. Because if I wasn't a Django developer, where would I go to figure that out? That's what you'd want to know, right? So there we go. You come to the databases section. How logical. So Django officially supports these things. Let's go to the Postgres one. The others are pretty cool that they're there, but all right. So we're going to use this package called PsychoPG. And it is a PsychoPG. I don't know 100% what it does, but I think what it does is it exposes Postgres to Python. So Postgres, like many other tools, is probably written in C, I think, and has a C API. And Python, being this kind of glue language, is good at having what's called a binding layer. So if you have a low-level language like C, somebody can write a binding, which is a layer that's like native to the language that you care about, so you can actually talk to that lower level thing. So I think PsychoPG is the binding layer that lets Python talk to the low-level Postgres API. And you don't mostly need to know about that. The Django developers did. Whoever wrote the backend to support this, they had to use PsychoPG to wire everything together. So our job is basically to just make sure that this is installed, that when we say we want to use the Postgres engine, that the package is available to install it. Now, unfortunately, that's where the work gets a little irritating. Because installing the Postgres package or the PsychoPG package is not as easy as one might think. I'm trying to scan through. There's some details that we probably should read. Tiring. So let's be diligent though. I want to get it right. We'll read through and learn together. But let's first install the right package. So we're interested in, I guess they've even renamed it. Let's go to PyPI and search for psychopg. So curiously, the newer one doesn't have the number on it anymore. I don't know if there was a psychopg1. It had been called for years and years and years psychopg2. I guess they finally decided, let's drop the 2 and do a major version bump. Our version of Django does have support for psychopg3, just doesn't have a number. Gets confusing. But the devil's in the details here. So there, and it tells you it's a modern implementation of a PostgreSQL adapter, or binding, as I said, for Python. So this is what we want to install. Now there are 2 kind of flavors, at least in the original installation of psychopg. There were 2 flavors that you install. One is this like binary flavor that was like pre-packaged for you, and the other was a compile from source kind of layer. But what they recommended was you should always do the compile from source thing, because you don't know how your operating system is going to compile or has configured all the details of psychopg or of Postgres. So you want to make sure you get it right. And so they have a strong recommendation to get the official one. Let's go read it though and make sure that that advice still holds. So here we are now at the psychopg project, and see what they say, because I haven't paid a lot of attention to it, frankly, since the upgrade from 2 to 3. So there might be new advice here, and I don't want to lead you astray. Getting started. Installation. Okay. So they are saying they're at least offering the binary. The quickest way to start developing with psychopg is to install the binary. This will install a self-contained package with all the libraries needed. The above package should work in most situations. It will not work in some cases, though. If your platform is not supported, you should proceed to a local installation. So I guess maybe the question is, so before we proceed to what does local installation mean? Let's check and search if does Heroku work with the binary version? Because if it does, that will make our lives so much easier. Heroku psychopg binary support. I don't know if we're going to find the answer here. It's also, that's 2 years old. Some of this stuff might have changed. I would love if we could get the binary. So let me unpack why. And we can probably see it from these installation instructions. The binary option is just like Python wheels. It probably is a wheel, in fact. And what a wheel is, and the name is silly, so fun little factoids and Python history. So Python, if you didn't know, the language is actually named after the group Monty Python and that comedy troupe. And so Python has a bunch of little Easter eggs in its community that kind of hint to that Monty Python comedy troupe. And one of them is actually the Python package index. The package index itself, before it was called the package index, used to be called the cheese shop. And the cheese shop is from a famous Monty Python sketch. that you can go, I'm sure, watch on YouTube. It's pretty hilarious. It's about, well, I'm not going to ruin it for you. Go watch this little sketch and enjoy. And so that was what it was called. That's where you put your packages up on the cheese shop. So fast forward many years later, they stopped calling it the cheese shop because it wasn't considered corporate enough or professional enough, and wasn't being taken seriously at stodgy corporations. And so they renamed it, but somebody came up with a format that they called a wheel. And so a wheel, when you hear it used with Python, is not in reference to like a wheel on a vehicle. It's a reference to a cheese wheel, which is an homage here to this cheese shop skit. Just a random factoid. Okay, now, what is a wheel? A wheel is a bit of Python code that has been packaged together with any binary compiled code that might also be needed. And so your operating system and my operating system might be different. And if we had some C code that is meant to be compiled down to the instruction set that's appropriate for your operating system, we might need different compilations of some C code. And so for Python projects that use C code and its extensions, it needs to have different versions of that compiled stuff. And so a lot of projects that are really popular, they will have wheels compiled for many different versions and many different popular operating systems. And the benefit of a wheel is that you don't have to compile it yourself, because if you did, then you need a bunch of extra tools. So ideally, somebody who is writing Python that is also using C or even Rust these days will pre-do the work for you and compile it and make essentially some kind of executable program that they will bundle, or a library that they'll bundle with the Python code, and that way you can download just that piece. Okay, so that's essentially what this psychopg binary is, more or less. In fact, we might even be able to go verify that. Let's go search for psychopg. And there's ways that you can see this stuff. So if we click in here and we look at the download files, maybe. So here we go. We've got, well, they're saying it's just a wheel. So maybe some of these do it in special ways that are unique. That are less clear with the download files. So installing it from the binary would be ideal, because it would mean that we don't have to install a bunch of extra tools to compile everything together that's needed for psychopg. And frankly, that has been a thorn in my side on Homeschool. The Homeschool app is making sure that that's working. It's not impossible, but it's just kind of irritating. So if they've solved that problem and have a binary version that you can just install and that will work on Heroku, then that is awesome. So in fact, I want to, for the time being, assume until we need to that that's the case. We may have to come back when we actually deploy to Heroku and fix this if I'm wrong. But if we do this, then we might be able to get that stuff for free. I'll give you a sneak peek of what we might have to do if we get it wrong, just so you're aware. So the local installation, and they'll even tell you they've got some C code in there that needs to be compiled and linked into the local library. So you end up having to install this libpq, and that can vary between Mac OS and Linux, so it's not always even obvious what you're supposed to do. So you need a C compiler, you need development headers, you need libpqdev. There's like a bunch of things, and there's this program that has to be available. All these things have to be available in order to do that. So that is that version. All right, let's read up what this pure Python installation is. These are some of these new options. There used to be only these two of either it was compiled or it was the binary, but it seems like they've got a different mode now. So without C, and anytime you see these this bracket syntax, that is an indication that to the pip installer that you want to install optional packages. So the binary form is saying install the extra packages that are related to this binary mode. So let's read what this third option is. This is new to me. Without C or binary extras, those things are, these bracketed things are called extras. You will obtain a pure Python implementation. This is particularly handy to debug and hack, but still requires libpq to operate. Okay. So the most hopeful case that we want is the binary version. That's really what we're at. What would be ideal? And then we'll forget the rest of it for now. So let's go to our requirements file, and we might actually be done pretty quickly here if this is the case. And I want to come down to the bottom, and right after Gunicorn, I want to say psychopg. If I spell it right, is that right? P, oh my word, my brain. PSY, yeah. PSY, psychopg. And we want the 3.1.10 version. 3.1.10. But we also want this binary mode thing. So let's put this binary here. And now if we do pip compile, the true test, so that added it to our file, which is cool. Okay, so it's including the binary package as a secondary thing. Okay. Let's see if it installs okay, because there's a question like, it may not work on my M1 Mac that I've got here. So pip install. Woo! I'm liking this. Oh man. If this works, y'all, lives are easier. Life is good. Okay. Coming back to the issue. Actually, CI should be done now. Hey, CI is now passing. Let's look back at the issue. And that's what I meant by the Postgres driver, is the psychopg aspect. We'll add it. Add psychopg. I'm so tempted to want to type 2. I've been typing psychopg2 for years. That fixes 34. We'll push that up. And we'll check the box for completeness. All right. Where are we at? I gotta admit, there's some internal conflict in me on my actual when do I pull the trigger on deploying to Heroku, because that's when I start spending real money. Right? Clock starts running, my Heroku bill grows. So I don't want to do that too prematurely, but at the same time, I don't want to be such a cheapskate that I'm worried about a few bucks. So just trying to think through, would this be easier to deploy now, or would it be easier to do some of these other pieces? I think the next thing that we might want to do is actually deploy to Heroku. But I don't know that I want to do that tonight, because it's already kind of late and I don't want to like mess it up. But we can start some of the aspects of this, or describe some of them that are going to be necessary. And oh man, like that's, yeah. Hold on, let me look through my issues list. 1 second, see if I have something in there. Because I even wrote some of these a while ago, So some of the steps that are in here aren't even valid. So if we deployed to Heroku today, we would basically get a web server sitting there doing nothing. And that's what doesn't feel great. It would mean that I'd be able to go to the Django admin and I would be configured to a database, but it would literally be doing nothing beyond that, aside costing me money. There's pieces that we haven't set up yet that are related to, and the reason I've got Node.js in here is when we set up CSS for stuff for Tailwind, that's going to be there. And there's the Heroku scheduler stuff related to actually sending email. And the challenge is that I could configure this to send email and start getting that in my inbox. But that's going to drive me especially crazy if I can't actually, because reminder, again, some of you might have come late, some of you don't even know exactly what we're building. The way this project works, or is going to work, is that it'll send you an email for your journal, and you respond to that email, and that the response is that what's going to get recorded is your journal entry for the day. But we haven't done the inbound side back to the service. We've done the work to send the email out, but not back. And so we're not completing that loop. So if I set this up today, or set it up at some point in the near future, we will be able to have a machine running, we'll be able to have a job, and we'll be able to send email out, but there's no loop back. And that loop back is critical to being the value. And part of the purpose of me wanting to do this early is so that I could start actually being a user myself of the journal service. So I think that actually nudges me back towards, let's not do deployment next, because there's not enough value there yet. And while we're here, let's edit this where when we deploy, I don't want to put this as a precondition. We don't need to have Node.js to start. We can just do the Python stuff, because we're not going to have we're not going to have any UI yet, so that's not required. So we can start with Python, and if build packs don't even mean anything to you, that's fine. I'll teach you later. So these are going to be the two things that we want, but I want to be able to have some confidence that we will not be too distant from being able to do the webhook back. So I think that what that does is it backs us back to number 10 and number 5. Number 10, I think, is a prerequisite to number 5. Number 5 is actually using the inbound. So that's where we'll pick up next week. I want to thank you all for joining in. Lively discussion. Appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something this evening. If you don't mind giving me a thumbs up on YouTube, and throw in a comment if you got some questions. Happy to answer them. It also helps with discovery and just some interaction there. If you're so inclined, you can certainly support me on either this platform as become a member there, or Super Chat, or any of those things. Or I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/mblayman, same as my GitHub name that you can see here. And there's no perks aside from your help. So I really want to get to a point where there's a product that I can say, you know what, actually it'd be better if you could support me by signing up, and then I can give you something back where you'd actually be able to use a journaling service if you want. I do want to say thank you to my supporters who have been here for a while. Rupert, Andrew, Dragos, Ryan, Patrick, Fred, Aaron, Philip, Shivan, and Monty. Y'all help me out and make it possible to buy lights, buy cameras, buy monitors, buy tools, all the stuff. I basically have taken everything that I've earned from y'all and poured 90% of it back into the same stream. So I appreciate that, and appreciate all of you. Hopefully this was valuable for you tonight, and I should be back next week. So take care.